All right. I think it's time for a moment with Bob. What do you think? Yeah, I've got another one. Um, Bob is trying to stop. Another moment with Bob brought to you by your friends at Offshore Drilling. Tonight's moment is entitled Descent. Uh-oh. Hey, Mike. The last article I read last night before I turned the computer off was headlined, "The Trump administration is going after naturalized citizens now." And part of the article read as follows. Donald Trump's administration is not only busy tearing children away from their parents at the border, they're also going to start focusing on fresh new ways to oppress naturalized citizens in America. On Tuesday, the Associated Press reported that U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the government agency that oversees immigration applications, is now creating a new office staffed by several dozen employees. It will be dedicated to looking for people who may have cheated to obtain their citizenship and stripping them of it. Think of it as terrorization by paperwork. End quote. Bob continues, I turned the computer off and went through the house checking to see if all the lights had been turned off and the bird's cage had been covered. Then I went into our bedroom. My wife had not yet gone to sleep. I told her the only person in her family that was a native-born American citizen was her youngest brother. Everyone else, her parents, the rest of her siblings, and herself, my wife, are naturalized citizens. She asked me what made me bring that up, and I told her that I had just read, or what I had just read. She said they weren't looking for Filipinos who had come into the country over 40 years ago. They were probably just looking at people who had come from Mexico, Central and South America, and the Middle East. Because I look at things through a slightly different lens, I said, yeah, for now. She turned off the light, and I turned on my Kindle. It's a backlit model, so I can read without disturbing her. About a half hour later, I decided that was enough reading for the night and turned the Kindle off. A few minutes later, I turned it back on, and in its faint light, wrote one word on the notepad I keep by my nightstand. Descent. D-E-S-C-E-N-T. Descent. Now it's morning. My wife and son are off to work and school, and I can follow where that one word leads. Descent. The short conversation my wife and I had the previous night must have taken place countless times during and throughout Nazi-controlled Europe. They're looking for someone else. They will come for someone else. And that, at that exact moment, it is absolutely true. On the continuum of fascism, at that moment, they're looking for someone else. They will be coming for someone else. But the simple fact is that eventually they will be looking at everyone. They will be coming for anyone. That's how that aspect of fascism works. Eventually, anyone can be a suspect. To paraphrase Arlo Guthrie, I can tell Nazi ghost stories all day long. I'm not proud or tired. But I'm beginning to understand these aren't Nazi ghost stories anymore. One by one, these haunted Halloween tales turn up in the New York Times. There are monsters in America, and they're tearing families apart. Regardless of how much terror and anguish they cause by ripping children away from their parents, the monsters continue to follow their fucking orders and do their fucking jobs. They're building a fucking concentration camp in Texas for children. And now the monsters turn their baleful gaze toward naturalized American citizens. 80 years ago, the questions the monsters asked were to determine how much Jewish blood flowed in the veins of the people they ruled. One drop made someone suspect, and a suspect could be a threat, and threats to the homeland must be controlled or eliminated. The safety and security of the homeland depended on it. Sooner rather than later, the monsters will broaden their focus and begin to gauge how American some people might be, regardless of their native-born status. Buckle the Clown said about football players who kneel on the field in protest, quote, "You have to stand proudly for the national anthem or you shouldn't be playing, you shouldn't be there, maybe you shouldn't be in the country," end quote. In the movies, it was Kevin McCarthy's character, Dr. Miles Bennell from Invasion of the Body Snatchers, running up to one car, from one car to the next on the highway, screaming to the drivers, "They're here! They're here already! You're next! You're next!" On television, it was the mob of neighbors turning on one another in the Twilight Zone episode, "The Monsters Are Due on Main Street." But we've passed through Rod Serling's middle ground between light and shadow into the real world. There are monsters in the streets of America. They're not like Nazis. They are Nazis. Sinclair Lewis wrote, "It can't happen here," but it not only did, it is happening right now. And we can stop using analogies. Torture is not used to get information from the poor wretch being waterboarded. Torture is used to terrorize the rest of the subjugated population into compliance. The people know that it is possible they could be next, so they do whatever they can to live under the radar of the monsters. Every single mother and father can imagine the inconceivable pain and anguish of having their children taken from them. Thousands of parents know it much worse because some thuggish ICE Nazi took their child. They don't have to imagine hell because they are living it. From TheWrap.com. Conservative commentator Ann Coulter proposed a novel solution for illegal immigration, suggesting that U.S. border guards might solve the problem and send a message to others by shooting a migrant trying to cross into the United States. She said, quote, "I mean, unless you're going to shoot one and send a message to the rest, if you shoot one to encourage the others, maybe they'll learn. But otherwise, we'll see, end quote. Coulter analogized her position to the Voltaire line from Candida, quote, "We hang one to encourage the others," end quote. Ann Coulter's DNA test might prove she's a human being, but regardless, she does brilliantly, illustrating this moment in the continuum of fascism. The current government of the United States, run by the donor class behind the mask of Fucko the Clown, has taken the penultimate step toward barbarity. The only thing left for them to do is to commence killing. We've been living in Canada for almost 7 years. In the pit of the night, when I'm awake and everything is true in the dark, I wonder if the relief we felt when we moved across the border was similar to what a Jewish family might have felt fleeing Germany to the safety of Austria in 1935. And in the pit of the night, I think about monsters and the question I would ask them if I had the courage. From the short story Fantasy Room by Adam Troy Castro, quote, "I would ask you what it is like to stand in absolute darkness with no stars above you and no cold capable of bothering you, and not suffer the uncertainty that comes from feeling the presence of monsters, to know instead that you are the greatest of monsters, and that the shadows hide nothing more dangerous than yourself," end quote. but that's like asking a psychopath what it's like to be a psychopath. The answer wouldn't explain anything. To understand it, I'd have to be in telepathic contact with a lunatic. Then I could see that ripping families apart and putting kids in concentration camps is no different from anything else that monsters do every day of their lives. Rod Serling cautioned all non-monsters about how easy it can be to allow and accept everything that can happen when we lose our humanity. Quote, "The tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, attitudes, prejudices, to be found only in the minds of men. For the record, prejudices can kill, and suspicion can destroy, and a thoughtless, frightened search for a scapegoat has a fallout all of its own for the children and the children yet unborn. And the pity of it is that these things cannot be confined to the Twilight Zone." End quote. Regards, Bob. And may I remind you that Bob's website is Voices in Our Heads, plural, voicesinOurheads.com. Tonight's Moment with Bob brought to you by your friends at Offshore Drilling. Oy.